Just delving immediately into this panel, this is about innovation. And I think the most important question that we asked ourselves was, okay, but what is that we define as innovation? And so I guess this is what we really want to discover today. You know, what is the innovation that is required? What is innovation that we see? And what is innovation that is required to actually make things happen? Okay, so welcome Marco, Michele, Marcela, and Esben. And just to start, I would say if each one of you could please just describe a little bit about themselves, what motivates them to their projects, what their current projects is, and just for everyone to familiarize with you a little bit. Thank you. Starting with Marco. Thank you, Marco.
Thank you, Nic. Thank you, everybody. By the way, amazing first 2-3 panels before us. Amazing conversation. I would have loved to contribute to that. But here we're talking about innovation. So myself, I'm Marco Lambertini, born crazy about nature since I was a kid. I started activism when I was 12, at a time when there was no social media, not even a fax machine, but typewriting. And went through research, field projects, campaigns, policy, and then the last 10 years, I was the Director General of the WWF International. And now I am the convener, not the director, not the leader, but the convener of the Nature Positive Initiative. It brings together all the global environmental organizations, all the global sustainability standard setting agencies, and all the main, or rather the main global coalitions of sustainable business. 2 objectives: first of all, to preserve the integrity of what nature positive means, and secondly, converge, align on guidance, particularly to the private sector, but also to other sectors in society, to deliver genuine nature positive outcomes. And that's what we're going to talk about later.
Thank you, Marco. And Michele, please tell us a bit about Nzatu.
I'm Michele Sofisti. I'm a former geologist who spent then his career in private sector. Now I'm back into nature, working since about 7 years in biodiversity protection and climate change activities. I have 2 main projects. One is together with Nic on spin, so it's decarbonization and the circular economy. And the other one, where I'm CEO, is a project born in Zambia. It's called Nzatu, which means in local language, hours. It's an impact company where we work on regenerative agriculture. Started with beekeeping, but now it's much larger than that. We are in 15 countries. And I think we have created an ecosystem which allows us to say that we have a triple impact: social impact on the local farmers community, quite heavily, because we try to be a bridge from their production or regenerative production to the international markets. The second one is wildlife conservation, and listening to Jan, I mean, it's just super inspiring. And we work with some of, I think, the most known and interesting organizations in Africa, like Great Plains Foundation from Derek and Beverly Joubert, the Global Conservation Corps. We do education in local schools for kids to learn about conservation and nature. And then we think also that we will, with our work, impact, at least locally, if not worldwide, the mitigation for the climate change, because we do good large project on agroforestry, intercropping. The next one will be in Zambia, about 7,000 hectares that we're going to plant with moringa trees, beekeeping, and intercropping with adapted, I would say, vegetation to help of this. So as you can hear, I'm very passionate and a believer that we can do the change, and we must do the change.
Marcela.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michele.
Good morning. My name is Marcela Flores, and I have been described as a veteran in food systems. I'll take that as a compliment, shall I? So I've been in the food industry for 17, 18 years, and during that journey have seen what previous panelists have mentioned before about the massive amount of nature that's lost every year. 75% of nature lost producing food whereby we depend on that system, right? So it's a bit of shooting ourselves in the foot, to say the least. So through that journey, I decided to do something about it. So I have 2 projects. One of them is about how we can provide extra value for existing rainforest, and that is through the conservation of rainforest by stacking benefits, developing ingredients and materials that can go directly into Scope 3 emission reduction, into supply chains. That's one element, conservation, ingredients from live trees, live rainforests. The project that I'm here today to talk about is about an AI-enabled MRV in the context of agroforestry systems that measures inorganic carbon sequestration as well as organic carbon and other co-benefits. And I'm very glad to say in the closed context of this room that we have just received a £500,000 government grant to be able to develop this further. So
congratulations.
Thank you.
So thank you, Nic. Well, firstly, it's a real pleasure to be here. It's been incredibly inspiring, the 2 first panels. Unlike some people here, I'm a novice conversationist, but I've been in technology for almost 2 decades. Started out in venture capital, then as a venture builder, building, scaling companies, and the past 7 years as an entrepreneur on my 3rd company. So learning a lot at the moment. Started building Prima last year, which is a climate fintech, building a trusted ecosystem for nature capital. So really playing to that bigger vision of why we're mobilizing capital today. So enabling or creating the incentive system for landowners, stewards of land, land management companies, and project developers to engage in regenerative and restorative behavior for nature, and then enabling companies to invest into that, and at some point further down the line, also financial institutions to invest. So it's been quite a journey. I thought it was going to be a little bit easier than it turned out to be, and I think what was said on the previous panel is very much a data problem. So that's what I'm doing at the moment. I'm working with a number of, I would say, prolific and very sort of progressive conservation organizations in building a data model and mapping out an ecosystem using a variety of technologies, machine learning, and so on. And in particular, building also an ecosystem beyond the technology to verify that data in a way that's that's institutional. So that's where I'm at today, and we have a lot of interesting projects that we're going to be rolling out later this year. So it's a real pleasure to be here to connect with everyone, and thank you, Nic.
Thank you, Esben, and thank you all. And it's exciting to have such a variety of perspective on the biodiversity challenge, which is functional to establish nature as an asset class, today's goal. So my question to you is, what is in your own projects and in the different projects that you're working on, what is the most exciting AI or technological advancement or broader innovation advancement that you are experiencing and you see as being functional to the biodiversity challenge that you're facing? Let's start perhaps with Marco. We talk about the broader innovation ecosystem.
Yeah, right. So rather than innovation in AI, I think our focus as Nature Positive Initiative is more innovation on HI, human intelligence. And so it's a little bit more the interface between cultural and policy innovation. Nature Positive is a concept that evolved in the wake of the Paris Agreement, when finally we felt in the environmental movement, at the time I was in BirdLife International, CEO of BirdLife International, we felt that finally the world agreed that the climate crisis was such that we needed to align on a common direction, set a common goal, and a common pathway that we could actually measure progress against to address the crisis. So climate, the Paris Agreement talked initially about carbon neutrality, effectively balancing sources and removals, and then came up with the concept of net zero emissions by 2050. Clear, measurable global goal, Today, every company on the climate agenda is using that framework to measure progress in addressing and in contributing to addressing the climate crisis. Nature always had very fluffy agreements, talking about harmony, beautiful concept that I'm sure we all agree, and I'm extremely ethical about the issue of nature conservation, but not really practical in terms of changing the paradigm of what we discussed this morning, how we run our economy, our development model, et cetera, et cetera. So we felt it was the time to begin to address that issue. What is the equivalent for nature of a Paris Agreement direction? What is the global goal for nature that could unite, create a level playing field, increase accountability, but particularly set the ambition, not an abstract ambition, but the necessary ambition to avoid what we try to avoid on climate. On climate, we try to avoid climatic tipping points, irreversible changes in the climate system. We need to do the same to avoid ecosystemic tipping points, because that's the other interconnected danger that we're facing today. Tipping points is something that human mind has never even conceived. You know, our mother, our grandmother keep telling us, when you make a mistake, what did they tell us? Don't do it again. But the concept of tipping point is that there is not going to be an again. Once we reach that point, it will be really almost irreversible for many of the systems. So Nature Positive is about setting the goal, and the goal is, if you want to compare it to climate, carbon neutral, net zero emissions, nature positive, net positive biodiversity. And that's answered Gwen's question in the previous panel, say what positive actually means. Because it would be naive and actually socially unacceptable to think in many regions of the world, to think that we can achieve zero loss of nature. Because you just walk on a grass in a park, you have an impact, you have a footprint, and many regions need to develop, and inevitably there will be an impact on nature. The net concept, which is inevitable, socially, politically, and practically speaking, creates that opportunity to actually balance impacts with compensations. However, the fundamental purpose of having such an ambitious goal is not just to lead the way to compensation. On the contrary, is to force a reduction of the footprint. And so net positive biodiversity is nature positive, is more nature at the end of the decade than at its start. 2020 baseline, 2030 deadline, this has been adopted now in the terminology, in the language of the mission of the Global Biodiversity Framework, which is the Paris Agreement for Nature under the UN Convention on Biological Diversity. That's the policy achievement. Now the next step is to translate it into a practical plan that companies, investors, society can implement by measuring the footprint on nature, by avoiding first and reducing, and then finally compensating and achieving at the end demonstrable net positive outcome. Net positive outcomes, and then we can talk about more later about metrics.
Michele can expand on the innovation that are used to preserve and the biodiversity aspects of what you guys are doing at Nzatu.
Yes, we're going to use even more technology, also, of course, artificial intelligence technology. Particularly, we have a partner, Trace6 Technology from Bangalore, helps us in measurement and traceability of all what we're going to produce. Again, we are in, for the moment, 15 countries, so we are talking about hundreds of thousands of farmers. We are indirectly working with them, but we needed to kind certify their work that is organic, no chemicals, and so on. We are working with a startup in Italy called the 3B. It's an incredible technology. They are using artificial intelligence, also satellites, to monitor the impollinator work. And they can really establish so-called biodiversity credit in the field that they will use. And I brought here a little toy that I'm very happy to show you. This has been developed by an NGO I'm advisor in Washington, D.C. It's called Resolve.ngo. They developed this in the last 5 years with Intel and some other partners. Now this is first prototype. The new one is half of the size. Is the cryptic micro camera that was thought to prevent poaching in Africa, because you can hide and get absolutely invisible. So you have the big thing here is the motion monitoring. Then you have a sensor for the light, a sensor also able to give a flash if it is during the night. You have a SIM card here with artificial intelligence and the camera. And what it does, if you say anti-poaching, so you don't want people walking around in an area, they go to kill rhinos or elephants. So it takes the pictures only of the human figure, not anything else. It's not a camera trap that take a photo for everything. The photo that it takes goes at real time to the destination. Could be the ranger, could be the forest guard or whatever, which can decide, because it's on a computer or on the mobile phone, okay, I need to intervene or not. Apart poaching, it could be also very interesting. Jan was mentioning about the conflict between wildlife and human population, India with the tigers, but also in Africa, the elephants and so on. This one, again, can also help to monitor and make some prevention. It can be used also for monitoring species, invasive species on islands, or forestation to avoid deforestation like in the Amazons or other areas, because if you go and cut a tree, you go either by a boat or you go by a truck. So you can monitor and check on the entrance and use this as a quite interesting tool. Now the development is completed. This one, I'm sorry, is the first prototype. So the new one is even more efficient than this one and much smaller, and is going to be launched in the market very soon.
Thank you, Michele. And then I guess to Marcela and Esben. So, we are aware of systemic changes that are fundamental to enable innovation. So in your experience, in your projects, what specific technology and AI innovations allow you to assess, protect, biodiversity, but also what does allow you to sort of start creating that biodiversity pricing systems and the value behind it in your own different projects?
Yeah, so thank you. Let me just take you one step back and just imagine about these big fans in Iceland, for example, that capture carbon, and each ton of carbon sold from the likes of Climework and so on is upwards of $1,000 a ton. So that's very valuable because according to scientists, that's much more durable, permanent type of carbon capture. I know this is massively reductionist, but that's what's happening. So that is happening in a context of very little co-benefits happening besides carbon sequestration. So what we're doing is that's direct air capture with that direct air capture of nature. So there are some amazing plants. Nature never ceases to amaze me. These plants, of course, capture carbon, use it in different ways to form trunks and leaves and soil, etc. But part of it is mineralized into the ground. So that process is called biomineralization. These type of plants are called oxalogenic plants. So we're developing a system that allows us to measure that the activity of these oxalogenic plants for inorganic carbon sequestration, but also for organic carbon sequestration and other co-benefits. Something that I find really, really exciting and how we can provide value to the indigenous communities where these agroforestry systems that we're developing are, is that we can provide those ways to collect the data, and that they can actually own that data themselves. And when it comes to selling that data to the food or other organizations, they can actually monetize that data themselves. So that's something that can be monetized, and those people who actually rightly are the landowners, the owners of the ones who are preserving biodiversity, the flows of money can go to them. And I think that's a really, really important point. Did I answer the question?
Thank you, Marcela.
I forgot kind of what.
Yeah, no. I guess before I get to Esben's point, I think we were talking. I think one of the topic we're talking about this morning is the importance of integration, about ecosystem integration, about financing throughout the value chain, from very early stage innovation throughout to growth capital, and then I guess this is not about a specific areas of impact, because all the ecosystems are connected. So there's a question would be, how do you use data and technology to kind of like to give priority to the biggest biodiversity challenge? But also, I think one of the questions that came out in the conversation with Marcela is, how do we compare new technology, new data, new knowledge with ancient indigenous knowledge that is indeed antique knowledge to them, but new knowledge to us? So how can we learn from both new data, AI, and technology together with antique knowledge? Thank you for Marcela, and then for everyone else, of course.
Yes, exactly. Because Alessa was mentioning this morning, I love the fact that VCs need to innovate on their own business models. We also need to innovate on our own business models and bring in that ancient tradition, those ancient knowledges that are available to us, that they have preserved 80% of biodiversity, yet a very, very tiny amount of financial flows are going to them. So companies that have SBTI targets, companies that are going to be under the pressure of complying with European law from very, very soon, those can be the ones who can adopt this type of data-driven approach to biodiversity net gains and carbon sequestration and other social benefits as well. Somebody said earlier about water sequestration as well, or water capture. So that's another really, really important point. But we need to actually make sure that those make their ways into scope 3, and so that companies actually meaningfully act inside their supply chains, not investing in a completely different project that's nothing to do with their supply chains, but something that actually they can price. That brings a complexity, because a commodity buyer will be looking at the price of the ingredient, but their sustainability lead will be looking at carbon or other climate action or targets that they have. So we have to manage the conversation with different stakeholders at this point in time. But one wish is that this can be more aligned in the future. But these are the conversations that we are having, and it's something that corporates are very, very open to.
Yeah. So I would say, I think the baseline technology is there now. Roughly speaking, there are two types. One is sort of satellite third-party data. The other one is field data, so on the ground, using sensors, for instance, cameras, sound, using drones for scanning and mapping the environment. So I'm pretty bullish on the technology, as soon as that's collected in the right way, which is what I'm building. But there's an issue that was highlighted also prior, which is the capabilities of it all. So one of the things I'm looking at a lot now is capability building, and tying up with different initiatives around the UN, because a lot of the biodiversity in particular are in emerging countries, or smaller countries that for obvious reasons don't necessarily have the capabilities or the finance of doing that. And some of the things we're working on are initiatives such as centers of excellence, so establishing capability building from overseas, sharing technology and transferring IP as well. So doing that on a pro bono or free sharing basis. So I think those are some of the initiatives that's going to help accelerate technology adaptation, in particular in economies and markets where they don't have sort of the latest. Like, for instance, I'm working with an organization in Australia, and like their capabilities in terms of data collection is like, I was absolutely blown away. Everything they're doing is so advanced, but we're taking that method and that technology, and we're taking that to smaller countries and helping them accelerate their adaptation of technology. So yeah, a lot of really good initiatives happening, I think, and I think the technology is there. It's about creating the data sets and doing that properly.
Thank you, Esben. And just continuing on that front, you sort of like bring together the data, the on-ground operations and the financing of these operations. So in your experience, we were talking about this morning about the importance of the private sector to drive this. So what do you see as sort of like investment required for the private sectors? What do you see as AI innovations to overcome some challenges? And to build for the panel as a question for everyone, what are the incentives that are required to make this happen at all level?
I think for really institutional capital, like when I started working on this, I was like, oh, it's going to happen next year and so on, and I sort of got hit by reality. I think we're a little bit far away from capital markets coming together at scale. I think there's kind of an intermediate step, and data is really key in that. I think initiatives like we have in the UK with net biodiversity targets are absolutely fantastic. It's not perfect, but it gives us an incentive to get moving in a meaningful way. So I think that's a very good initiative. There's similar things in the US under the Indigenous Reflection Act and so on. And then in particular, if you look at something like regenerative farming, for instance, which I think is quite important, like some of the data collection procedures we're doing there in particular are important because, back to why are we all doing this? Why do we need to, why are we out of balance? We've lost our connection to nature, and I think data can help us create the narrative and the incentives necessary for, more broadly, to create consumers to reconnect through our purchasing, by understanding how our manufacturing, how our farming is impacting nature. When we have the data to really show that story and tell that story and create that accountability and those incentives, then we can start moving into the consumer space. And I think that's where we have a really important battle, and data is very key in that. Like, the Sustainable Market Initiative are launching a working group specifically around marketing, right? And I had some conversations there. We were talking, well, if you look at something like smoking, we've known for a long time how unhealthy smoking is. All the data is there, the same for destroying nature. But there's been so many campaigns and so much media and attention brought to us around smoking, and why are we not doing that around nature, for instance? And from my side, like I'm building that data to show our impact in production and consumption. And my hope is that we can then use that knowledge to also more broadly talk about it and create a narrative that shows that our choices as consumers and as companies producing, that the way we do that will have a real impact on nature. And then again, reminding us that nature is literally, it's from where everything comes from, and that's what we've lost. And I think, so I'm obsessing about the data and enabling us to do that.
Okay, so strong importance of data. And but going specifically, a conversation between Marcela and Marco, we're talking about the resilience of some credits. Marcela, you sort of like expanded on different values, but then Marcus also, you mentioned once we were seeking at financial motivations, you mentioned, no, Nic, it's not about financial motivation, it's more about de-risking existing assets. So I'm curious to hear your different perspective on this. Marco first.
So the risking is the first step, right? I think what we need to start understanding is that actually the loss of nature is beginning to have a material impact on the economy and on society, on us as individuals. That's a fundamental cultural shift. Nature has been perceived until now very much on a moral ground, which is super important driver, but not powerful enough to actually change the economic system until now. Now nature is beginning to be perceived not just as an isolated ecological issue, but actually an issue that affects our economy, our health, our society stability, everything. And so is material suddenly, and that's why I think we're paying more attention to it. Climate is a classic example. Climate is already generating $400, $500 billion damage, cost, financial cost to society every year. That's why we're beginning to pay attention to climate, unfortunately, but that's the reality. So the materiality of nature is beginning to emerge, and that's a super important cultural dimension, way we value nature. The first two panels really started talking about that with a lot of great comments earlier on. But let me go back to the level of ambition, because I think this is the other problem that we're having. Honestly, I've been around many of you as well, in many conferences for decades. Nobody's gonna, no company, no government is gonna tell you, oh, I'm actually very excited about deforesting my country or driving species to extinction. In fact, on the contrary, everybody's fanfaring great things that they've done for nature. Now, you hear companies standing up on a podium or governments and say, we've done this, we've done that, protected area here, protected area there. And that was already important, and it has contributed to reduce the delta of the nature loss over time. If we didn't have those actions, we would have much less nature today. The problem is that we know from the data that we have today that it was not enough. This word enough is really what makes the difference between the past, before the agreement in Montreal on the nature positive goal, and the future, when we have that goal in mind. Today, a company cannot anymore stand up on a podium and say, I am nature positive because I have protected this forest. Not good enough. Not good enough. Because that contribution is not up to the job of halting and reversing nature loss. They need to now demonstrate that they have assessed the footprint, develop a strategy, not just to reduce the footprint and do something good, but to actually achieve a net positive outcome. In their operations, in their supply chains, they need to demonstrate that there is more nature at the end of the process of production and business and investment, if you talk about investors, in your portfolio, if you're an investor, no less. Now the question is, how do you measure that? And that's true that data are all there, plenty of data, in fact, plenty of metrics, how data are aggregated. I think the recent study has highlighted 4,000 different metrics on nature. Of course, because biodiversity is complicated, and biodiversity is complex. Species, ecosystems, genetic diversity. The question is that it's not about the quantity of data. Somebody said that earlier, and it's super important. It's about the quality of data, but not just the quality in terms of credibility. The quality of data in terms of demonstrating and representing the overall state of nature. The climate community has done a fantastic job in identifying the metric, tons of carbon. That is exactly the best proxy. It's not measuring everything in climate, there are plenty of other variables, but that is the best proxy metric to drive decarbonization and to keep us below the 1.5 degrees. The nature community, I'm part of, I'm guilty as charged, was counting birds when I was 15, so I started early to count nature, has been discussing nature metrics for 70, 80 years. We have millions of metrics, confusion, companies that approach the biodiversity issue, for them it's still a black box. And what do we give them? 3,000 metrics. Really? That's not the way to get the attention of a CEO or even a COO. So what we're trying to do with the Nature Positive Initiative now is not inventing a new metric for nature, not even a new data set. It's to converge and agree on what are the most meaningful, and allow me to say, stroke practical, stroke affordable, because this has to happen and to work for every company in the world, every sector, not just for the powerful company with money to invest or the company in the north. So what are those metrics that we can actually start using and create a level playing field so every company, every government, in fact, as well, could use those metrics after they develop a strategy to demonstrate a net positive outcome for nature. So they can actually say, we are on a way to generate more nature than the one that we destroy in our process. And that's through a number of actions.
And Marcela, your perspective, what are the incentives that you're hearing that are required for your projects to grow and for the technologies to grow in your project?
Mm-hmm. So somebody mentioned about government risks earlier today, and they are very material for our projects that are based in Mexico. We're planning projects also in Europe and in Africa, but for the ones in Mexico, whoever has followed the recent election, we now in Mexico have an elected female president who is a climate scientist. So all of a sudden, I wonder what the opportunity is for those projects to suddenly be more investable, and the opportunity there to say, as an earlier point said, well, is the government looking after this? Is the government measuring this? So, how can we be part of that solution that rigorously measures that that project, the rigor of that project, the science-based way to make that project material and important in a financial way for it to develop and grow. So that's something that I'm really excited about. Another thing that, just if I step back a little bit, if I may, Nic, I read a really interesting stat the other day from the International Energy Agency that says that AI innovations will be driving double the amount of data energy in the next couple of years. So how can projects like ours that are rigorously measured help with mitigating that spike in energy use? So we can align ourselves to those data centers, the Meta and so on, to be able to help them to decarbonize. I know that we provide, I think the element that now credits are more valuable when you can provide a number of other measured co-benefits, that's something that's really encouraged or encouraging.
Okay, just conscious about time. So 30 seconds each, starting from Michele. If you had a magic wand, what would be the one thing that would accelerate what you're doing in terms of biodiversity? Just 30 seconds each, because I see signals from the back.
I say two things from my side. The first one is the involvement of the private sector, which is not yet as good as it should in terms of investment, continuity, and also belief. So I think data and technology are available. They will keep it going. So the private sector is the one that can really make the change. And the second thing, honestly, and I come back to what Esben said, is communication. We need a big, and that's why the private sector, big communication for the general public so that the general public get conscious about all what we are talking. And when they go to vote, they vote for people with a little bit of brain and people that understand what we are talking, a little bit of knowledge about science, and maybe a solution will come and accelerate.
Thank you, Michele. So connection, communication, and making sure that there's awareness of what's happening. Yeah. Marco, if you had a magic wand?
So there is a politically incorrect answer and the politically correct one. Which one you want? I'll give you both quickly.
The action-oriented one.
Because I think the first one would be a bit tricky. Honestly, if we could, see how to put it, if we could extract the short-termist gene from our DNA, that would do. That would do. Yeah. If we start thinking just, as we say in Italy, beyond your nose distance, you could actually begin to think of what you really need to do today for a better future. But that's, possibly not practical. The politically correct one is pricing externalities. Because as soon as you price externalities, everything will change, including the pervert subsidies, including all the key things that today are really driving. Yeah.
Okay. Marcela?
I'll go back to that storytelling and to create that connection from the food that we eat and its impact in nature, and that allows agroforestry-based systems like ours to grow, to cover millions and millions of hectares of nature that is conserved, nature that is restored, and that people can really, and corporates of course can get into that. That would be my magic wand, which we're working towards.
Thank you. And Esben, if you had a magic wand?
Then I would say I wish I was in a room full of highly motivated, accomplished people that are passionate about solving the world's problems. So, which
here we are.
I'm incredibly optimistic. What I've seen the past sort of 10 months, and I'm fairly early, is just really inspiring. We have everything we need. I don't doubt that for a second. We have the money, we have the capabilities, we have the resources. We just got to go out and get shit done. And, so I'm, it's a lot of hard work, but, we can do it. So.
Yeah.
Wow, I think that's a super exciting end to this panel. Thank you all for your panel today. And let's continue next day.